could use that, or that's relevant to my child and my family. So we're going to go through the slides. And if I do that, does it move the slides? No, if I do that, it's not going to work this morning. Right, let's do that one then. Okay, so by the end of the course, we'll have confirmed that you are an expert parent. We're going to look at how you can hone your expertise and make it really work for you. We're going to look at some of the tools and tips that might help you present your knowledge back to those professionals. And we're going to try and give you the confidence to go into that room knowing that you are an equal and you are an expert talking to other experts. And that's what the course is intended to achieve. Okay, so getting the best from the course. We've recorded it in bite-sized chunks. I'm actually going to do it in 2 sections today. But if anybody gets to the point where they're desperate for a comfort break, if you wave at me, I'm quite happy to pause. When you're showing this back, whole forum, you might want to pause at various intervals to give people time. Normally this course would be delivered in person, but we had just done our training when COVID hit. And we decided that actually we could deliver it via the internet, via Zoom, and it seems to work quite well. The benefit of having it recorded is you can watch it as many times as you like, which is always a good thing. Okay, just gone the wrong way. Right, so as I said to you, this course isn't Pinpoint's course. It's been developed by other parent carers who themselves have got children with special needs and disabilities. So they're parents like you, parents like me. And the idea is that we share this training, and in time you can also share this with other families so that actually we roll that experience and expertise out across the system. I've already done some introductions, but just for the camera, I myself am a mum of 2 boys, one who's 25 but didn't find working his way through the education system very straightforward. There's a good news at the end of it. He's got a fabulous job. It turns out all those years of moaning about him being on his laptop paid off. He didn't do IT at all at school, but it turns out he's really quite gifted at it and he makes quite a decent career out of it. So if only we know what's coming further down the track, we'd probably be a bit more relaxed about some of the bits of the journey. My younger one, on the other hand, at 11, is just starting at mainstream secondary school. Lots of leads, lots of diagnosis, but loves school. And I've got a feeling might also have an aptitude for IT, which might just be his saving grace, because I think he's going to find the academic world of secondary school really quite a big challenge. But he's positive, and we've also navigated the health system with him since birth. Not some of the complexities some of you will have had, but we've been in and out of that system for a long time. And as I've just exchanged, my background is in schools. I'm a qualified teacher by background. I was a Senko and head of an MLD department, but nothing prepares you for being a parent carer of a child with needs. The roller coaster that comes with it, and the vast array of knowledge and information that you acquire on your journey with your child. So I don't come as an expert in all areas of health. I come as a mum who's themselves navigated the system. And today's presentation, I hope, will assure you that you have lots of the skills and knowledge that you need to navigate the system too. So part 1, this is where we get you thinking. I'd like you to jot down on your bit of paper what you think an expert might be. And there are no wrong answers. So what do you think an expert might be? So when we asked other people, these are some of the answers we got back. Person that's very knowledgeable or skilled about a particular area. Someone with broad or deep competence. They really know their stuff. And they might have experience in a particular field of expertise. There might be something they're particularly knowledgeable about. And somebody who's widely recognised as being quite a reliable source of someone you'd go to who would know, they'd know stuff. Did anybody have something similar? Did anybody have anything very different? No? Nods? There's some nods on the screen. Excellent. So experts are wide and varied. So how might you know an expert if you bumped into one? So I want you to have a think about the last time that you might have bumped into somebody that you'd consider an expert. Doesn't have to be in the field of health. could be an expert in anything. And I want you to think about what they did, what you saw, what you heard. And the reason for this is because an expert is not just about the knowledge, it's often all the other things that go with it. It's to do with body language, it's to do with the tone in which people speak. And we think that experts, and I'm thinking back to the last person I spoke to who is probably an expert in their field, they often look really confident. They've got an air of professionalism about them. Some of them are cheeky. They carry tools of their trade with them. You know, if you happen to be visiting a hospital and it's a doctor, the stethoscope is often draped around the neck. If you're visiting a car mechanic, they'll often have sort of oily rags in the back of the pocket because they're actually in the midway of working on the thing that they're an expert in. So tools of the trade are often fairly visible. They have kind of an authority about them. They walk into the room or they walk into the space like they belong there. They don't sort of lurk around the side of the walls and sort of hide, look, they're terribly terrified. They've just got this air about them. They were normally pretty good at making eye contact. I know there are some exceptions to that because there are some conditions that means that people are not good at doing that. But by and large, most experts are quite good at doing that, even if it's a learned skill rather than the natural tendency. They tend to stand fairly tall and they tend to dress like they're in charge, regardless of the setting. So it's not always a suit and a collar and tie. It's not always, if you like, smart clothes. It might be work clothes of some sort, but they have this air of professionalism. And the way that they speak often has similar characteristics. It's a confident style of speaking. It's authoritative. They speak in a way that doesn't invite you to challenge them or question them. They offer profession, they will often forget that you are not medically qualified and they'll use all sorts of technical words and assume that you might know what they are. If they are very used to working directly with parent carers, they might use a long word and then do an explanation, but not always. Now, the reason for sharing that with you is because we're going to try and help you join that club. Okay, we're not going to send you out of this course as a qualified doctor. You know, sorry, that takes 8 years and lots of other professionalism training. The whole point of this is to actually give you the confidence, remind you of the skills and knowledge that you have, and equip you to go out there to try and do some of the same things. But in joining that club, some of the professionals you're going to work with will have trained for years. Some of them will have taken lots of exams, particularly in the medical world. Some not in the medical world, I would hope, but some of the experts you would have thought about might just be really keen amateurs. But again, it's about this unwavering certainty about how they talk, how they do things. So another practical challenge, many hats. I want you to imagine that you've got a pile of dressing up hats in front of you. Now, if we'd all been together in Hull this morning, I would have literally come with a dressing up box. I was a primary teacher by background, early years. So I literally would have raided the home corner and I would have had hats of all shapes and sizes. And because I'm not in the classroom and because this is virtual, I wouldn't have to worry about head lice, which was always a challenge in the classroom environment when you had hats to wear. But imagine you've got a pile of dressing up hats in front of you. Now think about being a parent to a child. And I want you in this case to think about being a parent to a child who doesn't have any difficulties or disabilities or needs. Now, you may have personal experience of that, or if not, you might need to imagine that you're in that situation. I want you to think in the course of a week, how many different hats might you wear? So, for example, in an average week, you might be a cook, a taxi driver. I'd like you now to scribble down as many hats that you think you might wear in a week. Okay, remember, there's no right and wrong answers to this. It's a bit of fun, but it is to show you the length of the things that you might need different hats for. And while you're doing that, just to make you smile, you might like to think, you know, what sort of hat would you wear for the particular role that you've written on your bit of paper? And the way that you're all scribbling makes me think I would have needed a very big box of hats. And there's some smiles, so I know that lots of you are busy scribbling. Okay. Remember, there are no right or wrong answers, but I'm guessing by the fact that many of you are still heads down and scribbling, your list is probably quite long. Okay, let me share a list that I've already got. So actually, before we do that, I'm just going to go back. Now I want you to think about that list again, but this time I want you to think about it as a parent of a child with disabilities, additional needs, special needs, medical needs. And I want you to see if there are any extra hats that you would add to that list. So, for example, you might have other tasks that you do in a week because of your child's needs. And it doesn't have to be just your child. It might be another child you know, because that might help you add a few more hats. So other hats that you might end up wearing in a week, thinking about the fact that this is a child or young person with additional needs, special needs and or disabilities. Now, I'm expecting that your list is probably quite long, but now I want you to have a look at your list. And I want you to look at what you've written down and think, if that job was to be advertised in your local newspaper for employment, what word would they use to name that job? So taxi driver might be a taxi driver, but it might also be a chauffeur. Cook might be a cook, or it might be a chef. To be the cleaner, you might be the cleaner, but equally you could be a housekeeper. Have a look at your list. Are there any other titles that you would give for the jobs that you wrote down? And have you got some specialist roles on your list? So some of you might be doing speech and language therapy work. So you might be wearing your speech and language therapist hat. You might be doing movement activities. So you might have physiotherapists. Bet lots of you give out medicine in the week. You could write pharmacist. Yeah. I'm hoping you've got quite a long list. And I'm hoping you've got some specialist titles in there amongst some very ordinary titles. I know we're recording this. If anybody is comfortable to share, feel free to turn your microphones off and do some things you've got. Just call them out.
I've got a hygiene facilitator because trying to get a 12-year-old girl in the bloody shower is a nightmare.
Fantastic, Sim. I love that. That's brilliant. Love
Apparently
that.
you only brush your teeth if you're leaving the house, not just because they should be done.
Excellent. Yes, well, I recognise that. Some of that might also be to do with age rather than just needs. But yeah, that's fantastic. I'm going to hold that thought. I'm definitely adding that to my personal list. What's anybody else got?
I've put therapist down, but I split it into CBT and occupational because we do sensory diet as well.
Fantastic. So there is really quite a lot of specialist technical expertise in those roles. That's fantastic. Brilliant. What's anybody else got? Anybody else got anything different?
Nutritionalist.
Yes. Yeah. What do you have to do?
Well, I have to measure and quantify the foods what she takes because it's still first stage baby food. So I've got to make sure there's enough nutrients in there and also make sure she gets the vitamins and the minerals and the carbohydrates.
That's an incredibly complex set of tasks and roles, and the knowledge to be able to do that is quite something. Wow. Yeah, absolutely. Anybody got anything extra they want to add?
I've got podiatrist.
Negotiator.
Oh, hang on. Negotiator, I heard. That's a good one. I like that. I did that lots in my household each week. And what was the other one?
I've got podiatrist.
Podiatrist. That's feet, isn't it?
Yeah.
Yeah. So lots of work on feet. I've got a child that doesn't like their toenails cut. That's a sensory thing. You'd think I was trying to do this child great harm if we have to cut toenails. As I can see other people laughing. Podiatrist. I like that. I'm adding that to my job description. Brilliant. Thank you.
Mediator on mine.
Mediator.
Yeah, because she never speaks up for herself at school, so I have to relay messages and then justify why she's not spoken to them constantly.
Excellent. You see, all of these things you're doing week in, week out, they sound quite good, don't they, if you give them a posh title? But actually, how many of those things did you consciously know that you did week in, week out? And then if you compare your first list of things that most parents would do, then your second list of the extra things and the specific titles, what I would expect you to do is have a bigger list if you are a parent care of a child with SEND, and have a more complex list, and you've probably got a lot more technical titles in your list. And that's really the point of that exercise. And it really is to say, look at the expert you are already. That actually a lot of the things you're doing day to day, we tend to dismiss as we're just being a parent, we're just being a carer, but already you are quite a skilled expert parent carer, and you already have quite a lot of knowledge and skills, whether it's doing very technical things that require a lot of additional expertise, or actually household take me far longer, are far more complex, and I can't guarantee the outcome is quite the same as it would be for a child without those level of additional needs being part of the picture. And don't forget about all the things that you know and you did before you became a parent carer. So I know there's people on this call who've already kindly shared with me, you know, that they come from various different sort of professional skill sets. People have done some quite interesting things before they became a parent carer. You bring all of that into your role as a parent carer, but many of us may well have left the work that we did previously in becoming a parent carer. You know, I stopped working for 8 years and was at home for 8 years with my son. And I kind of forgot all the skills that I had until I came back to working with the Parent Carer Forum, and suddenly remembered that actually I could do all this stuff. I just hadn't done much of it with a professional paid title. I'd done all of it for free. And so therefore I'd sort of made it less important and less skilled than it was. And I kind of think that it's really important, I say that out loud, that you must value all of the skills you have, including the things that you bring as a parent carer that are not just your parent carer skills, they're the wider you and your interests and your expertise. So you're already pretty skilled and pretty expert. Now let's find out how we might become an expert parent carer in the health world. So you're already an expert, and you've probably heard this before, and I hope you have, but you're already an expert in your child. Okay, we talked about other experts that have trained for years, but depending on how old your child is, or in fact how old your children are, you've probably been training for years and years and years already. And some of you who've got much older children will have had a cumulative time with children and young people which spans many years. You've already done your training, and although some of us will still be doing our training probably even when our children are 30 or 40, look at the expertise in training times alone. If you're an expert as a paid professional expert, for example, in health, you've probably got exams to show for it. How many times have you been tested as a parent carer? How many times have you tried what worked yesterday and it doesn't work today, and so you've got to have a new plan? And it worked this morning, but it's not going to work this afternoon when they're back home from school and they're tired and crabby and they've had enough. You will have been tested many times. You won't necessarily have done exams, although I do know that some of you on the call have been busy studying and learning. And one of the things I have this search habit that I acquired when I can't sleep and I'm on the internet. You've probably gained all that knowledge, you've probably done lots of tests, and I can tell from the conversations we've already had that you are passionate about your child, your children, and that you care deeply, and that's a common factor for our experts too. I suspect that if I asked you again on camera, and I'm not going to do that, but some of you have already been kind enough to share your background and tell me a little bit about your circumstances and your children, you will talk really confidently about your children. You talk with that unwavering certainty about your child. I didn't hear anybody come on and say, well, I'm not very sure, and probably what I think doesn't really matter. You talked confidently, knowledgeably, because you know your child inside and out. And one of the things I want you to take away from today is not just the things that we're going to look at specifically around health, but when you go into any meeting, whether it's health, whether it's education, whether it's social care or a different setting, you go in as an equal. You know your child inside and out. You know them really well, and you go in as an expert. And I can't say that enough times, because, you know, even as a parent carer, even as somebody who delivers this course, occasionally I've gone in and I've doubted myself, and I've come out afterwards and I've thought, do you know, Sarah, you know that about Joe, you know what Joe's good at, you know, actually that won't work because you've tried it before. So please just remember that. We're going to look at health specific, but please remember, you know your children really, really well. So we're now going to do an activity which is about how you share what you know, and equipping you to share that with the same level of expertise and confidence as the other experts you will meet in the course of your journey through SEND. So we've already established that experts speak in a certain style with a certain tone and the way that they speak, but there is also something about the vocabulary, the words that experts choose. And we're going to try practicing some of those same tricks for you. And some of you might do this already and not know that you do it. And some of you might suddenly think about the next conversation you have with somebody and how you might make it work a little differently from you. So on the next slide, I'm going to show you some statements that parent carers often say about their children. And I want you to guess what a parent carer of a child with special needs and disabilities might say. So it's a bit of fun. So, my disabled child as opposed to my non-disabled child. My disabled child has a placement. What might you say if your child doesn't have a disability or an additional need? Well, you might say my child goes to school. Already the language is different. The disabled child, we're talking about a placement. There's something more technical about a placement. It's not to say any school place, it's a chosen school place. My child uses special transport. I know somebody on the call this morning has an older child who is sorting their own transport for school this morning. But other families might talk about their child getting the bus. My child accesses a mainstream school. Accesses a mainstream activity, goes swimming. But it's the same for a mainstream school as opposed to my child goes to school. It's the choice of words and how we use them. Down the right-hand side, if you like, is our ordinary vocabulary. Down the left-hand side is our more specialist vocabulary. My child's in transition. My child's moving up to college, or my child's going to secondary school. I don't know what happened with my slide presentation there, but it's kept you interested because my child has annual reviews. My child has parents' evenings. Mine has siblings. Mine's got brothers and sisters. Requires intervention. I'm not sure I like that phrase. That wasn't my chosen phrase. Has help and support. My child has peers. You know, mine's just got friends. And the whole point of that was actually the choice of words we use are sometimes really helpful, but also sometimes they make our children different. So sometimes you need to think about the wording you're using and the setting in which you're using it. So language can be really helpful, but it's how you pick up those phrases and when you choose to flex them. Okay, so some of them are useful to flex. There is something about having a conversation with an expert, particularly in health, where they talk about something and it's quite nice to be able to suggest that you might know something about that subject too. There's something that makes us feel quite empowered and quite equal about that. But there are also times when other experts will do it and it makes us feel a bit more inadequate because we use a much simpler vocabulary, a much simpler way to describe those same things. So the whole point is to think about when you can make those words work for you, when they're not helpful, and sometimes really plain speaking is powerful because actually it brings everybody back to, it's not about a transition, it's not about peers, it's about actually having friends. I want my child to have friends, and that's really powerful. So sometimes you need to pick and choose what words you use when and where and how. So thinking about what words that experts use, they can be a barrier, they can be an enabler, they can help us, they can hinder us and hold us back. Some of our day-to-day words that we use as parent carers, some of the phrases we use, even with our children, again, can be powerful for good and not so good. And I think it's just in reminding ourselves when it is helpful, and also how do those phrases make us feel? I know that sometimes I've sat with professionals and they've described my child in a way that actually feels like they could be just any child. And sometimes I want them to describe Joe, and I want them to talk about Joe with all of his quirks and all of the things that just make him Joe and not somebody else's child. And sometimes actually that's really powerful. If you've got a child that really likes something and there's something about them which really makes them the individual that they are, and there will be lots of things, actually sometimes reminding the expert you're working with about that unique individual is powerful, and that stays with the experts that you talk with. So we've romped through the first part. Some of you are thinking, okay, well, that's all very familiar. Now we're going to move into health. Now, this is the point where I don't want everybody to suddenly have a panic, because health is complicated and it's a bit difficult and it's a bit tricky, and they're changing the system around us. But actually, lots of this is probably very familiar. Okay. So how to become an expert parent in health. So you've got all the other expertise already. We're going to add the health layer in. Now, lots of you are already accessing the health system at different levels with different levels of experience and exposure to the health system. And so some things will be very familiar to you. Some things might be less familiar. And some things you might think, oh, I've never heard it explained like that. That would have been helpful. So we're going to share some ideas that would be, I think, useful. The health system, if you've never thought about it before, is actually triangular. Not in real life, but if you think of it as a triangle, it kind of explains better how the system works. But the system itself is huge. It's complicated. Very rarely do you see it written down on one page, how it is and how it works. So we're going to give it a go here today and try and explain the great national health system that we have in this country and how the care is organised. And it's really organised into 3 stages. At the very bottom, you've got the biggest stage, which is primary care. These are the universal services. These are the services open to everybody within the healthcare system. Above that, the slightly smaller tier in the middle of that triangle is your secondary services or your specialist services. And right at the top, the smallest number of people working at the most specialist end of the system are your tertiary services. Okay, and actually the reason it's shown as triangular is also by the sheer number of people working in the different sectors. So the bulk of the services, the bulk of the people are in that bottom section of the triangle, which is huge. Secondary, smaller, and by the time you get into the top, you're talking about really small numbers of people and maybe only a handful of specialists. So let's look at primary 1, okay, level 1, that great big section at the bottom. Let's look at who's in that section and how you get to those services. So in this section are your general practitioners. You and I would call them your doctors, but we do tend to say the GP surgery, the general practitioners surgery. This may sound like something that you're very familiar with, but I'm always surprised. Everybody in the UK is entitled to be registered with a doctor's surgery, but I still come across people who aren't. So if as a forum you are working with families and discover that people disclose to you that they don't have a doctor's surgery that they're attached to, I've given you a link for the NHS service and they can register themselves and their children. Doctors are required to register you and to make appointments with you. At the moment, that's an interesting challenge during a pandemic because different GP surgeries are responding slightly differently to that. Most have returned to some sort of normality, but many have found that virtual appointments actually are quite efficient. But for some families and for some circumstances, it's not the most useful way of engaging with your practice. So please make sure that you're in discussion with them about what works for you and your circumstances. But most people will see their GPs fairly regularly. When your child is born, if you're born in this country, you will have had a National Health Service number, a pink card, and you will need that for registering. And again, most of you are probably registered. You probably know that you've got an NHS number. You'll have one, your child will have one. But if you haven't got one, again, here's the links to actually make sure you get your number and then to register. And again, I'm going to share these slides so you'll have these. Health visitor services. So if you've had a child fairly recently, your experience of health visitor services might be quite different from somebody who's got a child of maybe say 10, or a child of somebody, a child who's now 15, or a young person who's now 20. Health visitor services have changed quite a lot over the years, and they are slightly different area by area. Health visitors are there to do health education and health promotion with families with very young children. Depending on where you live will depend on whether you see them maybe once or twice when a child is very small, newly home from hospital, or been born at home, and a health visitor will come and visit. Most won't see a health visitor again unless there is already a fairly identifiable issue within those first few weeks and months. You may get a second checkup around about the age of 1 or 2, but by and large, you will see very little of a health visitor. If you're a parent of a much older child, you might have remembered the health visitors being around more often for a much longer period of time. But most families will have access to a health visitor. Families where there is a concern fairly early on, the health visitors normally are key in picking that up quite quickly and then referring you on through the system. They're part of our sort of navigation for health. School nurses. Every school must have a named nurser, a school nurse. They're there to provide health promotion and education for school-aged children. In primary schools, they're the ones that tend to keep an eye on the medicine cabinet, and you'll get letters to say, you know, your child bumped their head today. But if your child is at a special school, you will probably have a school nurse who does that job more as a full-time role. And depending on the level of complexity within that school setting, you may have somebody who does quite a lot of hands-on nursing. It just depends on the setting, and it depends on the needs within a school. Accident and emergency, I hope none of you ever need, but it is there for those moments of crisis. It is the emergency medicine. And of course, many of you will know that we are actively encouraged by the system to use 111 and to phone for health advice before making our way to accident and emergency, because we tend to get more people turning up at accident and emergency when they could really be being seen by GPs in a slightly slower time scale or with a slightly different offer. But accident emergency is a really important part of our system. It's for serious health problems. But for those of you who are not aware, they will also be a port of call if you've got a child, young person, or even an adult in mental health crisis. But the advice there is to phone 111 first, option 2, to speak to somebody from the mental health team who may advise you to come to accident emergency if it's a crisis that requires immediate intervention. All of these services in that big general section at the bottom are all commissioned. That means, in simple language, they're bought by people on your behalf for you to use. That's a good example of technical language. Those of us who work for forums talk about commissioning a lot. In reality, it just means they buy the services that you use. You will have clinical commissioning groups in your area, but I'm going to come back to that later. This one refers to Cambridgeshire because I'm based in Cambridgeshire, but Hull will have its own clinical commissioning group. And I'm going to talk a bit later about the new integrated care system that is taking over from that current structure. But people go and buy those services for you. Level 2, middle part of the triangle. So this is a smaller number of people working in this sector. And most of the people working in this sector you will not get to unless your doctor has referred you on. So you can't just say, I'd like to talk to some of the people in this middle section. The way through to it is normally through your doctor, not exclusively, but normally. So this includes the community paediatricians. Now, many of us who've got children with additional needs will probably have worked with this service, and some of you may have worked with the service for a long time. So these are our community children's doctors, often based in local health centres or local clinics, not always based from hospitals. And they work closely with other specialists that are involved in supporting your child. It's also the community paediatricians that will often be your part of your assessment route if you are primary aged and requesting an assessment for neurodiversity. So ADHD or autism, it'll often be the community paediatrics team that will do that at primary. And by the time that you're heading into secondary, it might be the mental health team. There is a slight variance, but community paediatricians are your specialist children's doctors. And somebody asked me just before we started recording, at which age do your children transition out of that? It will generally be round about the age of 16. But again, it depends on the child's needs and it depends on which other specialists are involved. But these are children's doctors as opposed to adults doctors. Also in that category, in the secondary care, are the outpatient services. So that could include occupational health. For those of you who've worked with occupational health, your engagement might be quite different because sometimes you'll see them once and they'll give you lots of things to go away and do, and that might be your only engagement. Sometimes you might see occupational health ongoing because of your child's needs. Sometimes they might work with you in a slightly more sort of, in Cambridgeshire we call it episodes of care, and that seems to be consistent elsewhere. So you might get a 6-week intervention or a 12-week intervention, and then they're on call after that. They can help with all aspects of daily living. If you've got a child with physical difficulties and disabilities, you might already have quite a lot of engagement from this team. If your child's needs are evolving and changing, you might need engagement from this team. And if your child's needs are still at that very early stage and they're very emerging needs and you've not yet got a diagnosis, sometimes this team will come into play either around the assessment stage or actually at the stage where you're saying, I'm not quite sure what's going on, but my child is finding this difficult. Okay, so they'll come into play at that stage. Very good on equipment and resources. And if you haven't discovered it, fledglings, for those who are looking at occupational therapists and thinking they could be good, fledglings is now part of Contact a Family. They offer lots of equipment. It's charged, in other words, you buy it from a catalogue, but lots of equipment that occupational therapists often recommend. So things like cutlery, which is really good for children who've got mobility difficulties, extra equipment for children who find the sensory issues of just getting washed and dressed is really quite overwhelming. They're not the only provider, but they're one of the best providers that specialise just in specialist equipment, and lots of it is the sort of stuff you use day to day. Physiotherapists will do big movement mostly, and some fine motor movement like pencil and scissors work. Increasingly, lots of that is available on websites. Cambridgeshire has it on their NHS website, and forgive me, I don't know whether Hull does, but there's lots of their advice is now more readily and easily accessible. Lots of it is around building skills over time for those children that don't naturally acquire those skills, but sometimes you might also work with this team if your child's mobility has suddenly changed. And for example, if you've got a change that is a result of surgery, as well as, if you like, maybe genetic change for a child. And again, sometimes they'll work with a child over a long period of time. Sometimes they will work with a school around setting a programme of care and training people to deliver it who are not themselves trained physiotherapists, but can actually do the programme of activity the physiotherapist has specified. You see, that's a technical word, isn't it? But physiotherapists will not always work directly with a child. Sometimes it'll be somebody else trained to carry out under instruction the specific program of movement and practice and repeating of exercises that will help your child. Speech and language therapists is everything to do with communication, but interestingly, they'll also do help and support for children who've got issues around mobility around their mouths. They might work in hand with the physio team, but sometimes it's as much around mouth movement and tongue movement as it is around actually getting sounds out and communicating through talking and speaking and making noises. And again, sometimes you'll get an episode of care rather than an ongoing commitment. Quite often they're involved in the diagnosis assessment stage to give you that sort of background information. There are lots of other secondary care professionals. There's audiologists, there are specialist feeding teams, and forgive me, because I'm working from home, somebody hasn't read the note on the door that says, please don't ring my doorbell. So lots of specialist teams, clinical psychologists, clinical nurses. Some of you might access wheelchair services. So depending on your child's needs, there are some that are very, very specific services. But one that's commonly used across the system is CAMS, which is your Children and Adolescent Mental Health Service. Now, again, this comes under secondary care. These are multidisciplinary teams made up of psychiatrists, psychiatric nurses, psychotherapists, psychologists, and sometimes there are social workers and other types of therapists in those services. Depending on the level of need, you might have a referral to CAMS and you might have a short episode of care. Your child might be referred to CAMS and you might be referred on to another more specialist service, or you might stay with CAMS over a period of time. For those of you who've got children, for example, with ADHD, you may already have encountered the CAMS service, the Children and Adolescents Mental Health Service, because they will often oversee ADHD and the diagnosis, and particularly if there's medication involved, it comes under their care rather than the paediatrics care. One of the things nobody explained to me that I found with hindsight was really helpful, but I was able to ask the question through the forum, is why do they make you go on funny courses, parenting courses, before you can access services, particularly around diagnosis for autism and diagnosis for ADHD? And what hadn't been explained was for paediatrics, they want to know whether some of the parenting ideas are useful and work and make a difference. And sometimes they do, and sometimes they don't. But for CAMH, because their guidelines are slightly different as psychiatrists working in mental health rather than doctors working with physical health, their guidelines often require that you have done some sort of intervention that has a record and is evidence-based before you then access their service. So particularly for ADHD, you might sometimes be asked to attend a course and to have recorded and kept fed back your experiences, then taking that information and trialing those things with your child. For me, it made me feel like I was a bad parent, and maybe I wasn't a very good parent. But once that was explained to me, I then understood that because their professional guidelines are evidence-based in mental health, that actually they then can't progress the rest of the diagnosis until you've got that evidence base for them to draw upon. I wish they'd told me that before I started that bit of my journey. And for those of you who haven't been told that, I hope that's a bit of a revelation you can share with other people who get a request to attend a parenting course and don't necessarily understand why that's a requirement often under mental health, but it isn't always under physical health. And again, all of those services bought and commissioned by your local clinical commissioning group. I'm going to move on to tertiary care, then I'm going to pause for some questions. So tertiary care, top of the triangle, smallest group of people. These are your specialists. So these are the ones that will refer, they definitely have to have a referral through either from the bottom to the next stage, to the top stage, or sometimes you pass go and you get sent straight to the top. It depends on your child's needs, the level of specialism, and sometimes the level of need is identified as being significant enough or specialist enough that you get sent straight to that very specialised top tier. And this includes services like genetics. So some of you may already have worked with services like the geneticists. It will include things like acute specialisms like paediatric surgery, children's cancer services, sometimes specialist treatment where things don't happen very often, but the level of treatment and intervention is very specific and very costly. So some services will not be available to all. And it's the sort of things that you sometimes see on the news where there's a new treatment that costs an awful lot of money, but for some children really does make a difference. Those come into that very top tier. And it's also where you tend to find the highest level of specialisms around consultants. So consultants are not just ordinary doctors, these are doctors who've trained for longer, with a greater level of specialism. That's all part of their medical training. And that might include consultant paediatric oncologists, so that's children's cancer doctors. It might include consultant paediatric surgeons. So depending on the age of your child, you may need to see somebody who is a specialist in that particular part of medicine, and also for a particular age group. Doctors that specialise sometimes in treating babies and very small, physically small children will be specialists in that, because the surgery is obviously on a minute scale, and they may be different from the specialists who deal with older children or even with adults. They will have specialist nursing teams. So whilst you have nursing teams down at GP level, there are doctors, nurses that work in your local practice. You'll have nurses that are working alongside those clinical teams in your local communities. But these are the specialist nurses that have a much higher level of specialism in the very specific thing that they're supporting the doctors on and working alongside the doctors. And some of them will have areas of expertise which the doctors themselves don't have. And then we've got CAMH also in this group again, but this is the very complex mental health support, where we're talking about the sort of provision that is provided in multidisciplinary units. So those are the sort of places that you might go to and be asked to go to stay for 6 weeks, or to go as a day patient, so that your child can be observed, and the professionals can then consider what sort of help and support might be better than the things that they're already able to provide, because they spend more time watching and listening and understanding. And some of them will be outpatient teams, but some of them will also be hospital placements, where your children are under the care of mental health and in hospital. Again, all bought and paid for by a commissioning team. So the next time that you're in the system, or it might even be today, because I know some of you are accessing services even as we speak, just remember it's a triangle. So depending on where you are today with your child's needs, you might probably be in the bottom part of the triangle. Some of you might be accessing services from the middle, but some of you will certainly be in that top tier, working with the most specialised help and support and care to support your children. And I wish I'd known it was a triangle, because I don't think I quite understood why I couldn't go to the middle and why I couldn't go to the top. And the answer is because it's a tiered service. The idea is that the doctors refer you up through those services. Some things inevitably take quite a long time, because the waiting lists can be long, but some services are time critical, and the waiting list will be shorter, or you'll be given a time scale from when somebody will see you. But certainly if you're waiting probably in that middle tier for quite a long time, don't forget you can go back to your GP and say, it's fine, I'm on a waiting list and I'm going to be seen, but I'm really worried about my child in the meantime. Do keep talking with the person that referred you on if you've got concerns and if you've got worries, whilst you wait for some more of that specialist help. So I'm going to pause there, and I'm going to ask, has anybody got any questions so far about any of the things I've covered? It doesn't matter if you don't, but I just wanted to pause in case people have. And I haven't been able to follow the chat. Have I got things in the chat I've not seen? So people have been fabulously commenting. So some of you, yes, thank you. There's a comment in the chat about fledglings, so we'll make sure that that gets shared more widely, using CAMH, yes, and waiting for help. I'm just going to cover that, because that's something that comes up in Cambridgeshire a lot, particularly concern about what do you do while your child's mental health is particularly fragile and you're really genuinely worried about their risk. Most areas will have a CAMH service that you can call upon. But in our area, and forgive me, I'm hoping the forum will be able to then provide this information for you for Hull. We also have voluntary sector services that parent carers can phone. that support mental health. And as a parent carer, if I'm worried that my child is self-harming, if I'm worried my child's a suicide risk, I can actually talk to other professionals as mum and get a bit of help and support while my child is waiting to see a specialist. But as I was reminded the other day by one of the senior commissioners, one of the senior buyers of the mental health service in Cambridgeshire, if you are concerned that your child is at immediate risk, you phone 111, option 2. You should be naturally transferred to the mental health team. If you forget to press option 2, you'll get through to the generic team and they'll probably send you to the GP, and the GP will probably send you back to 111 and you'll go around in a tight little loop. You must press option 2. That'll always get you through to your area's mental health service. They will advise and triage your child's needs. If you remain concerned or something changes, you can go back to that service as many times as you need to. And quite often we don't tell people that, probably because they're worried they're going to be swamped. But if you are sufficiently concerned, that's what it's there to do. Lisa, I can see you've got your hand up. I'm going to stop sharing just for everybody back in. Right, I'm going to share my screen and I'll just need to fast forward through. Right, so if I hit share, right, let's just wander my way through. Will it let me share it? Just bear with me. We're not going back to the beginning. I'm just going to go through. Okay. There we are. Okay. So welcome back, everybody. We're going to have a look at the integrated care system. So having just explained the triangle and about commissioning and clinical commissioning groups, as of the last 18 months, 2 years, we've had a new system signalled that is coming on stream. It was supposed to have been on stream already. It's delayed until July, but it is probably the biggest reorganisation of the system in a long time. It has the potential to be incredibly positive and do many of the things that the old system struggled with in a better way. But because it's a new system, we are going to go through the inevitable challenges of leaving one system, starting a new system, and the new system getting itself up and running. So different parts of the country at different stages with this. It's a national programme. So what I'm going to try and explain to you is what's happening nationally, how it applies for Hull, which appears to still be at a much more emergent stage in terms of the information they're able to share currently, and give you a sense, I think, of how you might make that system work in terms of the commissioning. This is the system around the buying and the managing of all of your services. So integrated care system, ICS for short. You'll hear it bandied about a lot. This allows you to, if next time you hear it, to be able to think, I know what that's about. And there are lots of people in the system who probably won't know as much as you, to be fair. So just as a bit of background, the National Health Service is just marking its 70th birthday, which doesn't sound that old really, but actually that's a long time for a national offer around health. And as part of that work and its birthday celebrations, it was looking at what it did well, what it did could do better, and what wasn't working. And it came to the conclusion that there are 3 big issues it needed to try and fix. Issues around funding, the volume of funding, how much things cost, and whether that money is used always as effectively as it could be, should be, and the fact that the money seems to be, the money needed year on year keeps growing, but actually the ability to fund it doesn't match it. So there's a real issue around being able to afford a national health system and for it to do what we'd expect and would like. Issues around staffing, because again, that triangle in practical terms is huge in terms of the number of people involved in delivering those services, whether they're frontline health professionals or whether they're part of the back office support staff, people who build the buildings, manage the buildings. It's a whole vast team. And also probably the biggest worry for all of us is around the inequality of accessing services by where you live, by type of need, by your ethnicity, by your gender. It doesn't matter how you cut it. A system which is supposed to be open and accessible to all, the data suggests otherwise, and that isn't a good thing. From our point of view, that's a very positive thing that it's recognised, but solving those 3 big challenges is practically a real problem for the system. So the NHS long-term plan said that it was going to try and do something about that. Its priorities will probably be no surprise, that you've got to move to a new model, because the old model assumed that there would be less physical people wouldn't live as long as they do, people are surviving better with more and more complex health conditions. So what the service has to do is more for more people with more levels of complexity. One of the issues is sort of clearly around funding. I'm not going to get into the debate around whether that's a good or a bad thing, but the answer is we all like the services and we would like more of them more frequently, better quality, and they're not free. But the priorities around the quality of the care and the outcomes for what really makes a difference. Clearly, 2 years of a pandemic have put staff in our health sector under an amazing amount of pressure, although everybody has really struggled with the pandemic, regardless of what your roles have been. But certainly the health service has been under considerable pressure and continues to be. And clearly this is part of a sort of longer term commitment from government. So with all that in mind, what's going to happen? And what difference is it going to make? Well, if you believe what the websites say and what the rhetoric, it's supposed to be about improving services. It's supposed to be about making stuff join better. So there's your technical language. Greater coherence means it's got to just join up and work better. Making everything in the system work better. For those of you who are familiar with accessing services, you know that occasionally you drop down the gap in the middle. It's kind of not one service, but it's not another. It's a bit clunky. If you're in the system, it's as difficult sometimes. And actually, you may or may not necessarily have fallen over this as parents, but quite often the professionals have to have conversations about whose pot of money is the service going to come from, or the multiple services, because it doesn't come out of anybody's. It should be a bit of everybody's. And so sometimes they have to negotiate and do a bit of working out who's going to pay for what. The equality bit has got to be probably the biggest win out of this, is that everybody should have access to high quality service consistently everywhere, regardless of circumstance. And it's got to do more of what it's supposed to do. So all of that very, forgive me, I've left on the bottom Cambridgeshire and Peterborough. I'm not going to tell you about theirs. I'm going to tell you about Hull. Really interesting, very difficult to get information from Hull's integrated care service about what Hull's integrated care service is going to look like. Cambridgeshire's got quite a lot of information available already around structures and boards and who's going to sit on what, and they're still worrying about how they're going to make the money work and the contracts work. But they seem to be further down the line in terms of what they're sharing publicly. What I can tell you is this is all from the Hull, Coast and Vale website. I haven't asked their permission to share it, but I'm sure they won't mind seeing as it's on their website. Your integrated care system is quite complicated, but they are differently complicated depending on where you are in the country and how they decided to carve it up. So you will have a number of integrated care systems covering the geography of the map that you can see on the side of your screen. If I just move this box slightly, because that would make it easier for you to see. I'm just going to hide you down the bottom for a second. You will recognise that geography as places you know, and you will see there is a Humber, Coast and Vale integrated care system. But depending on where you live, and you'll know this from the other services you access, whether it's it won't affect social care, but education. If you live on a border, apart from the sea border, obviously, but if you live on a land border, you might get your services actually from a neighbouring integrated care system, which complicates matters no end. And sometimes our children also get education services from across the line on the map. It just depends where you live. Okay. This is what the Hull, Coast and Vale website says you're going to get. This is what it has decided are its priorities. So they're not my priorities. I didn't write this slide. I just copied and pasted from what they're saying. So they're saying their priorities locally are healthier people, better out of hospital care. So actually that's going to be quite a thing for all of us to get our heads around, because we tend to feel more comfortable when we go somewhere because we think we get better care. Some of the other locations is actually how many of those services could you deliver at the same quality but not in a hospital setting. I'll be honest, the challenge is you are going to want to hold them to account that they've got to be as good as, if not better. But there are some things currently we provide in hospital that is probably not a good way of delivering a service. We probably could provide some of those things better and differently. But when you are in hospital, it should be the best care possible. It does need to be cost efficient, and some of it is not as cost efficient as it could be anywhere. Better mental health care. Now that will resonate with those of you. We've already been talking about that. So, and I think that's probably one of the things that comes up across every single area. There is a real sort of opportunity to have a foot in the door because they're publicly saying it, but also the honest answer that they've got to balance the books. They have to do more with not necessarily much more funding, but some things actually could be delivered better, more effectively, because technology has changed, how we work has changed, how we live is changing, and actually some of the things we do in the system is because we did it 20 years ago, and actually some of those things are probably time for a change and time to move forward. So some things could be better and different. Your ICS is saying then that it's going to have 6 place-based programs with 2 immediate priorities: healthier people and better out of hospital care. Okay, it's saying it's going to have 7 cross-cutting programs to help achieve that aim. So hospital care, mental health care and cancer care, and 3 enabler programs, which is your communications and your engagement, your workforce and staffing, buildings and estates. I'm guessing they're lumping those 2 in together, and the digital technology and finance. In other words, that's your infrastructure. That's the how you deliver. The cross-cutting is the stuff that actually goes across lots of different services. Hospital care, could be pediatrics, but it could be oncology, the cancer care, it could be something different. And the idea is that I think it's interesting, they're going to look at place-based. This is something we're hearing more and more across the system in terms of local government. You'll hear it in education around sort of place-based services, but I think there's a real move to deliver more things in smaller clusters. So you'll have something sort of where all the services hang off sort of a central hub that's rooted in one of the communities. I don't quite know how that's going to play out anywhere, but I'm certainly seeing that in the Cambridgeshire area, where we are seeing more and more of our services going to be clustered around, in our area, it's likely to end up being clustered around district councils because it's quite a big geographic county. I think you will see similar things starting to happen in the Humber Coast and Vale area, but because they can't tell me that yet, I'm having to make some assumptions. So this is again from their website, and I've given you the link to the website, and I'll be honest, I took this from the website about 2-3 weeks ago, so it's possible it's updated itself yet again, but they're basically saying their sort of places, their place-based is going to be around those locations, so you can see Hull in there. I'm assuming it might be around existing buildings and services and centres they've got, but you'll know your area much better than I do. You can see there the programs, and you can see there their 3 strands of sort of behind the scenes making stuff work. As a forum, I think there's all to play for, both by places and in terms of the programs. And certainly if I'd had the structure of how they were physically going to organise it by boards, which we have in Cambridgeshire and Peterborough, but I know that not everywhere has it yet across the country, you will get that. Certainly the expectation from the National Network of Parent Carer Forums is that the forum should be on not necessarily the highest board, because the board right at the top is likely to be very strategic and not necessarily children's services centred. It'll be everything. So that's possibly not the best use of your time, but certainly the expectation is that the forum should have a seat on the boards which look at services which impact directly on children and their families. And I would expect that that is an offer that's being made. And if it isn't being made, the answer is you will want to talk to the health authority. You might want to do that through your local authority because they're working hand in glove in most places, and certainly if that doesn't unstick it, you'll need to come back to the National Network of Parent Carer Forums, and we'll try and unstick it through that mechanism. But certainly you should have a seat on that board as parent carers to be able to make your voices heard, but also to work out where the best place is to have which conversation. So some things you can do in a big board meeting, some things you need to say, actually, can I raise this as an issue, but out of this meeting, we'll go and do some further work. And certainly some of the conversations we've been having around that mental health issues and around the joined up services and you get a diagnosis and then nothing happens. There's an opportunity there to do better, but actually some of that might then appear in mental health, because if you get a diagnosis, for example, for autism, but you get then no help and support, there may be, for example, long-term mental health issues that would arise out of not meeting need. And so again, it might be that you have to box clever and raise it in one of the boards, knowing that actually there's a read across to a board somewhere else. So maternity locally to me includes children and young people, but it's badged as maternity and children's collaborative. So you may also hear that as part of the language. They're not calling them boards, generally they're calling them collaboratives. So this is where your expertise comes in and your technical language. So if somebody says, would you like to come and sit on the Mental Health Collaborative Hull Forum, I think you should be nodding furiously and saying, yes, please, send me the details, we'd like a seat, please. But for that, read that it's the strategic board and you would be having an input. So I very much look forward to you telling me that that's working. Interestingly, this is the Children and Young People's Alliance, which again is part of the whole version of the integrated care offer. And this is what it's saying that it will do. And I looked at that and thought, well, that's quite interesting. I'm wondering whether the forum is played into that. So again, if you're not played in with the Children and Young People's Alliance, that might be a way to work together. It might be that they're busy doing one part of it and you're busy doing something else. And this is just the link for how to get involved. The person I spoke to, as I say, couldn't give me much more information, which was a bit shocking, really. I was expecting them to say, absolutely, and I'll put you in touch with somebody. But as I say, I think they're running very hard to meet the deadlines, which instinctively feel late, but also in practical terms, I think will be very challenging, because to move all of your commission services over to a new structure to make sure that all those services seamlessly continue to deliver and get paid, and you manage all the contractual arrangements, is quite a big ask without dropping the ball before you even start any new things. So if you see the Hull, Coast and Vale integrated care system, please nod wisely that you've heard of it. But equally, I can't tell you much more than that, because at the moment it's just not available. I'm hoping that at least is helpful that you know about it. But I really would like to have been able to say to you, and this is where you ought to be sitting, but that will come. Okay, I'm happy to pause and take any questions if there are any, but don't ask me anything too hard, because I don't know much more than I've already shared with you. But hopefully that's helpful. Okay, so now you've done the triangle. You've done the integrated care system. Now we're going to do some really practical stuff. Okay, this is the last bit, and then we will finish. I'm going to send you that. Will it affect you? No, it shouldn't. Yes, it might. It probably won't. In a nutshell. Okay, this is the bit. Again, bit motherhood and apple pie. But actually, even when I read it, and I kind of thought, yeah, actually, it's always worth reminding myself of the things that do work, the things that don't work. And some of this I do instinctively, and occasionally I need reminded. So the next time you are trying to access the National Health Service, you now know what it looks like. These are some of the top tips that the parent carers who pulled this training module together thought would be useful. So things to think about before you go for an appointment, and you might do this instinctively, and if you've been in the system a long time, you might kind of not even think about the fact you do it. It sounds really daft. Make sure that when you're offered an appointment, it's a time that you can attend. And equally, if you know that that's a really rubbish time for your child, be brave and ask for an alternative appointment. The worst they can do you is offer you a second one you can't make, or a third one you can't make. And obviously it's easy if you do that in a live dialogue rather than by emails backwards and forwards, because that just takes forever. But if you explain what you need and why you need it, 9 times out of 10 people are reasonably accommodating. But equally, if it turns out that you can't find a date or a time that suits and you might have to wait 3 months, you might go back and say, okay, I'll have the first one. It's not ideal, but it's better than waiting for 3 months. But quite often, if you say to people, actually, I've got a child that doesn't cope very well with coming out of school, is there any chance you could give me an appointment either at the beginning of the school day or the end of the school day or after school? Or actually, I can come to that appointment, but I've got a child who's going to find that quite difficult. Is there a chance you can give me an appointment so I don't have to bring the child with me? Depends whether the appointment's for you or the child. And I say that because quite often as parent carers, we think about our children and we don't remember about us accessing the system. What I meant to say earlier was, you do remember that you are a parent carer. Do you remember that long list we did right at the beginning of this morning about all those technical extra hats you wear? You're a parent carer. You should be registered with your own doctor as being a carer. You do more than just a normal parent does. You do all these other things. That's what makes you a parent carer. You are entitled to be registered as a parent carer. It gives you some priority around some services, but also your GP is there to make sure that your mental health and your physical health and well-being is okay. It's perfectly okay to go back to your GP and say, I actually need some help. I'm actually struggling. I'm struggling because of my child struggling, or because my child can't access the services, or actually I just need a bit of help and support because I'm finding things difficult. Your GP should be there as much for your support as well as anything that you access for your child or young person. We talked in the introductions about sensory needs. If you've got a child, or even if you as an adult, if you've got somebody with sensory needs, think about the things that are helpful to those needs and the things that are unhelpful, and then try and get your appointment to work. If you have a child that really can't cope with noise and a busy surgery, talk to the surgery about if there is any possibility that either you can have a quieter time of the day, if there is such a thing in your surgery. Ask them, for example, can you wait in the car and can they give you a call so that you don't have to sit in the waiting room? Now, some surgeries are doing that anyway because it's part of the COVID thing. Some of us have found that quite helpful for our youngsters. But again, if you've got a surgery, for example, which is really bright and really busy, and that doesn't play to your child's natural strengths, you know, they find that quite difficult. Talk to the surgery about whether you have to wait in the waiting room or actually whether you can sit slightly off to one side somewhere where you won't get forgotten, but you're just not necessarily in the hubbub. Just talk to them about what you need, because you probably make some of those adjustments, but sometimes we put our youngsters in settings which don't really support them in a way that is helpful, and sometimes that can be managed. I've got people with hands up, so I'm just going to pause for a second. Sim, is that a new hand? Yeah, go on then.
I was looking for my mute button then. That last one about giving a card to the receptionist at your GP, I found they have a pop-up that they denied existed, and then I said if I was a violent alcoholic or something that was going to come at you, you'd have a pop-up to know that that was coming. So they now use that facility to say, Mia has autism, please don't use a lot of language, talk slowly, talk fewer words as possible, and don't praise her directly. So it's a really beneficial one for, you know, instead of handing off cards to everybody, especially like COVID, our GP acts like you've got the plague the minute you walk in and like, we can't take anything from you. But yeah, I found that really handy that it pops up now.
And actually, lots of doctors have never realised that they can use it for that sort of function, because it depends on what system they're using, you know, but they've also got things like, they also have sort of red flag systems for if you're allergic to a particular type of medication that actually, but what it needs to do is if you've got something you want the GP to twig every time you come in, or if your child attends unaccompanied, because if you've got a child who's now becoming a young adult, they might attend without you. So anything you can do that helps make that process easy and simple. So Sim, that's brilliant. I'm glad you found that, and I'm glad your surgery is using that. But if you haven't found it and your surgery is not using it, talk to them about whether it's possible. You might want to do that in your GP's appointment. you may or may not find that it's a conversation you can have with the receptionist. You'll know that by how busy people are and how receptive people are. It might be better done in your GP's appointment when you've got less distraction around you, but it's a brilliantly useful thing. Emma, is that a new hand?
Sorry, no, it's not. Sorry.
No, that's absolutely fine. That's absolutely fine. So lots of top tips there. The sensory things. I don't know how many the public explain about sensory, but there are lots of top tips around things that you can do depending on the one that I saw when I was new to sort of looking at sensory was about the size of the teacup, and some of you might have seen it. It's an American video which a child narrates who themselves has got sensory issues. If you've got a lot of capacity for a particular sensory need, you've got a very big cup. It takes a lot to make it overflow. So I've got a child who really needs to bang and to touch. His sensory needs means that actually hurts, comfortable. Other things, the cup is more like a thimble. Light doesn't work for Joe very much. He'd be a vampire if he had his own way, and he'd be indoors all day, every day. But it's amazing what sunglasses and a hat with a brim does, because suddenly he can manage on a school playground, for example. And we've just done that automatically for years as parent carers. We've just kind of adapted. But occasionally it catches me out, for example, in the health system. Sometimes you go to places in health where, particularly if they've got newer, shinier buildings, where the lighting's a bit in your face. And I suddenly realise I've got this child that's increasingly uncomfortable. And it's that thing about, have I got the sunglasses with me? Did I bring the hat, even to wear indoors? So just think about your child and things that make it easy. And don't be afraid to ask. Top 10. I like tip number 1. I didn't like this, but it is a top tip. If you can build friends with the reception staff, it'll pay you dividends. And apologies if you can't build friends with your reception staff, or your reception staff keep changing, because depending on how busy a surgery it is, sometimes you've got no idea who answers the phone. But again, it's that thing about you kind of want them to answer the phone. And if you say, I need an appointment, because hopefully you don't have to go through the whole spiel again about your child and what needs you've got, and hopefully it just pings up on their screen, or they know you. Getting to know your GP. I had a conversation with a parent carer on my patch this week. Can't get the child to the GP, but also it's a big practice, and some of the GPs seem to relate better to this young person than others. It's a personal thing. The child just seems to be a bit more relaxed around one or two of them rather than all of them. Just because you're allocated a GP doesn't mean that that's the GP you have to see. If you find a GP that you think it just works better with, you can ask to see that GP for your child. Sometimes that's just helpful. And if you're not happy with the GP and you're not happy with that surgery, yes, they've got a complaint system, but don't forget you could be registered somewhere else. I hope that doesn't ever happen to you, but it's sometimes as much around personalities and personal styles. They should all be the same quality, but sometimes it's just the human factor. You are advised to make routine appointments with your GP. When this was written, we weren't in COVID. It was written a long time before COVID. Most GPs don't expect you to make routine appointments, but the message there is, don't leave it just to when your child's unwell. It's quite good if your GP gets a sense of what your child's like on a normal day, not just when there's something particularly unusual. Jenny, come on in.
It's for Lisa because she can't raise her hand.
Okay, sorry. Okay, which Lisa? Lisa, come on, chip in.
Yeah, I don't know why.
That's all right. Thank you.
I think my laptop's got additional needs, to be honest. So it's just when you was talking about the sensory stuff, and it's kind of off topic. It's not really about this per se, but it's because you was talking about it, and it's one of my biggest frustrations. And I've got a good parents here. But my son has quite a few sensory needs, like sensory seeking and sensory avoiding.
Yeah.
However, he's also a 10-year-old, very cool boy who's just changed to a new school. So he doesn't want to look different. He's just found out he's dyslexic. And when I asked him about it, his response was, I'm not bothered because you can't see it. So that's all he
Bless him.
cares about. Yeah.
Okay.
So things that I know that he needs, he won't use them, and even more so in school than he won't use them. So therefore, to everybody, and he's amazing at masking because he's like super intelligent. So then, to a lot of people, when I talk about him in the sense that I do, I sound like I'm talking about a kid with additional needs, and they're looking at me going, "Who are you talking about? Because there's not wrong with this kid." So I don't know what to do. Is this thing? I don't. How do you get a child?
So what things does he sorry. What things would he benefit from that he's not using?
Again, it's different things in different settings, but like the obvious, like kind of a defender type things at certain times. We don't need them all the time. The fidgeting stuff. I mean, I have them. I take them into meetings with me. So if I don't have something and I'm on a meeting similar to Bale's in a classroom, I'm twiddling with stuff, I'm getting up, I'm doing stuff. So things like that to help him. In his old school, he used to have stuff like Velcros and this and that because he'd become this kid who was different, but he's now started a new school where he gets a fresh start, and he just doesn't want anything like the dyslexia stuff. He should have access to certain things. He just doesn't want anything that makes him look different. So instead, he's taking the path of suck it up, work harder, all that jazz.
Okay, so there's a couple of things as a parent that I might suggest that might be helpful. Part of me says, in an adult world, the more you fit in, sometimes the smoother path you have. Now, I'm a great fan of individualism and being quirky and being entirely yourself, but I'm also practical that you live in a world that kind of goes, you're expected to fit in, whether, most of the time, unless you get to a point in life, and it's normally when you're not in school, where you can choose to be quite individual. So I guess at school, it's a brilliant skill that he's flexing, but the issue is how much stress does it cause him to fit in and cope? Is he secondary school or primary?
Primary.
So
Yeah.
You might have a conversation with the school about what he's used before and equally why he's choosing not to use it now, so that they have an understanding of he would have had that, but he's not. So he's going to be potentially, some of those things will just still continue, those behaviours. But there are also other things that you can do, but you probably need school's agreement for it. So things like, but don't stick it in the wash, because I tried that by mistake. Things like a bit of blue tack in your school pocket, so that you've got it and you're fiddling with it. It might be that actually it's something that you've got just tucked inside your jumper, but you might need to agree with school that that's what you're going to do. So it's not particularly obvious, but it's something to fiddle with. So you might talk to him about, when he's got that urge, what is he doing and how can you make that a bit more socially acceptable? Because if having something that kind of is, if you like, a big red flag that kind of goes, oh, I don't know, what can I pick up off the desk? I'm sat next to him. My child normally sits next to me. I've worked alongside him for the last 2 years of COVID. He's at school, but when he's here, so it might be, I've picked up a toy car off his side of the desk. It might be that, you're sat with something that's really obvious, and therefore you're fiddling with it. And we have a habit in school of giving fidget toys, which are very easily identified as being a fidget toy. So, because everybody else isn't allowed them. But if it's something that everybody's allowed, then it might be a bit more socially acceptable, providing the teacher or the staff in the classroom know that that's what it's being used for. So it might be, I don't know, I've got a rubber. It might be that the fidget toy becomes, instead of it being a brightly coloured loop that you flex, which very obviously looks like a fidget toy, in a classroom you'd have a rubber. So it might be that the rubber is the thing that he's allowed to, that he fiddles with. And as long as the staff know that that's his equivalent, that might be more socially acceptable. So you might want to talk to him about what he would find useful, what he thinks doesn't mark him out as being different, but equally allows him to manage the things that he needs. Does that help?
No, yeah, it does.
Yeah. And again, it might be really silly things like, it might be that with school's consent and yours, he has a bit of a label just tucked inside his sleeve that he fiddles with discreetly, because then you could sit and you could fiddle and nobody would particularly notice you were doing it. But that might be acceptable.
It's that fine line, isn't it, between wanting to be able to cope in the world that we have it, whether you don't have to like it, but we have to accept that this is the world we live in. So I want him to be able to cope in that world, but then it's that fine line between then how much level of distress it's then causing.
But by the time they're getting to primary and the fact that he's expressing that, the answer is that's probably really quite a good sign about his maturity and starting to understand himself. And actually he might already have things that he says, I don't want to do this, but actually this would be helpful.
Yeah, he takes a different water bottle in actually.
Yeah.
It's got a really thick but also soft silicone spout. So he tends to, nobody knows what he's doing, but he tends to use that
to chew on.
Yeah, that's not that obvious, I guess.
Yeah, and again, it's finding the things which become socially acceptable but allow you to manage those things that you need to manage. And it's just trying to, and there's no easy answer to it, because as our children get older, you know, they want to fit, they want to manage, but also sometimes our school uniform policies, for example, make that quite difficult, and reasonable adjustment of school uniforms is a whole can of worms. But some things can be adapted or managed in a way that doesn't necessarily make them look vastly different from anybody else. It's just trying to find the stuff. But it's good that he's identifying it. That's a really good first step. But you might also need to talk to him about the fact that, but if on the other hand, that's a stressor that makes it harder to cope with the day, it might be that with agreement with school, there's a way of then giving him 5 minutes out to just go and do that physical stuff or whatever it is he needs and would find helpful.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah, I also noticed it's really daft things. It's harder for a boy because, you know, but girls often will do things like take a hair tie, and as long as it's not too tight and doesn't cut the blood off, you know, we'll have a hair tie that they've just happened to leave on their wrist because it's something to pick at, but it's not obviously a bracelet, and it's not obvious, you know. So there are lots of things that you can do that don't break a uniform code, but just kind of help. And particularly if school know that that's what's going on, they might be a bit more supportive. Does that help?
Yeah, thank you.
Yeah. There's no easy answer, and as I say, some things are just easier, but particularly when you're accessing health, do think about the things that you know about your child. The routine appointments is an interesting one. I do think getting to know a doctor that kind of understands, so you don't have to tell the story 700 times, helps. There are a number of one-page passports. I've got some on the Pinpoint website. You may well have some already on yours. By all means, go and have a look at them. We haven't produced them, we've just cribbed them from other people's sites, but that's often quite helpful, is literally to go armed with something that you can give to somebody that says, this is what my child does, this is what my child finds helpful. You know, a bit like the flag that comes up on the computer system. When you're working with my child, you know, please use simple language, or please, for goodness sake, don't touch my child. You know, because actually, or tell my child, if you need to ask my child to sort of show you what's wrong, you know, please deal with it this way. It's just the sort of thing that helps professionals do their job better, because sometimes they just genuinely don't remember from one appointment to the next. They're not being unkind, they just don't remember. Some hospitals, if you have to make a visit to hospital, most hospitals these days will have a learning difficulties nurse. I don't particularly like the title, but I think it's good they have them, that's attached to the hospital, who should be able to help make the visit to hospital a bit smoother, a bit simpler, do some preparation work, equally look at the communication needs. And most hospitals increasingly will have systems with electronic systems with red flags and other things that allow you to put the information in. But if you have got that to do as a visit, do talk to the hospital if there are issues about attending, and if you're already in the system and making hospital visits, if there are things that you need, don't be frightened to ask them to make adjustments or to help if there are things which are difficult. Jenny.
I just wanted to say, when my son was last in hospital, I always worry about him coming round from anaesthetic, and I'm always like hovering about, you know, like to get straight in there, because he can't verbalise what he needs, and is, you know, quite complicated. And he's got a passport that he takes everywhere with me. And as I'm hovering outside, I said to one of the nurses, will you please give that to the staff? If he wakes up, it's got everything that they need to know about him, you know, like desperate. And then eventually they came for me. When I got in there was all his favourite music playing. And there was like reading it, because it said on it, you know, like what'll help him. And she'd bothered to get a telephone, and she'd put the fratellis on for him. And it was just a really nice experience to see. Oh God, it was really being used, and it was lovely. It was lovely to see it finally being used, yeah, in a real positive way.
And that's brilliant.
So I think it's really worth doing it. I really do. It's taken a lot of years for people to start using it, but it is working now.
And you can use the same thing. I've used it for going to Cubs. We've got a pen portrait for going to Cubs that explains Joe and what he's going to need and what he's going to find easy and what he's going to find difficult. I used it for secondary school. They were proactive. They asked me for a pen portrait, which I thought was genius because it described, I was able to describe what he's like on a good day, what they need to watch for, but also what really plays to his strengths. You know, he loves to please people. Praise him to the hill. He will work his socks off for you. Doesn't matter how hard it is, praise him, because for him, that's really important. And reward him, give him concrete stuff. So he has come home with certificates and been really delighted, and that's really made a difference. But tell them what works, and it sounds like focus on the positives as well as the things that are difficult. Do remember there is that bit, you are an expert in your child, do not get fobbed off. I mean that very nicely, but don't allow people to fob you off. Do be calm, do be patient, but do be persistent in the things that you need or you want. And remember, you're a carer, so remember you've got your own needs. I thought it was somewhere in the slides, but that really is important. Appointment or disappointment. Right, we're coming towards the end now. I want you to actually think of a time that you went to an appointment for your child that went well. I'm hoping you've got one, at least one, but I want you to think about an appointment you've been to that went well, and I want you to write down, scribble down what went well, why did it go well, as in what made it go well, and how did you feel about it? Because what we're looking for is what are the factors that make that a positive, constructive, useful experience, so that actually you can focus on the things that are helpful rather than the things that aren't, because we always tend to think about the things that are difficult, and it's focusing on the things that help. And then I'm going to get you to do a quick bit of sharing. So I'm going to be asking in a minute for something that went well, what made it go well, and how did it make you feel? And if you're sitting there thinking, I haven't got anything terribly positive, think about one that was better than the other ones, because it might be a sliding scale. Rather than it being perfect, it might be that it was marginally better than the 6 that went before it. Okay. People are busy scribbling. The reason that this particular one is done as a written one is because, a bit like your one-page passports and the sort of what goes well and what you ask for, if you've written down something as a result of this bit you're just doing now, and you think, I wonder if that's the bit that we miss on the other times when it hasn't gone well, then I'm hoping that's helpful. If you think that you kind of it went well because actually we went at a time of the day when my child wasn't hungry, or we went and we saw somebody who was just really lovely, or we went and actually it worked well because we've been before, so my child knew what to expect. You know, I just want you to think about the thing that just made that appointment, that visit, better. Right, who'd like to chime in then? What went well, and why do you think it went well, and what did you feel? Very briefly, who'd like to get us started? Oh, everybody's suddenly gone very shy. Go on, Jenny. Thank you.
I've got those.
Lager.
Go on, Jenny.
So we went through to Sheffield, where Laura is now, to see a lovely surgeon, and we'd had years of just like not getting any support, and I walked in, and the first thing that he said was, oh, hi George, I'm so and so, and who was this you brought with me? And it was the first time that my son had actually been spoken to, actually first. Sometimes he's never spoken to in the room, so it was really nice. But also what he carried on to say was, I haven't a clue, I don't know why you're in pain, I don't know, but I'm willing to try and help you, and I'm willing, and I think it was that honesty of, he didn't know, he came in that he was the expert and he was going to solve it for us, but it was just that he was going to try and help us the best he could, and it was really lovely. And he just always, I mean, we've seen in multiple occasions, he's got such a lovely bedside manner towards George, which I will always appreciate and always be really grateful for, because he made me realise how he should be spoken to.
That's brilliant. And I think the answer is in every opportunity, if you get to feed that back through the forum, feed that back, that talking to the child or young person first and making them feel that the focus is on them probably makes a big difference for many. That's really brilliant. And it obviously made you feel positive.
And confident in him as a surgeon as well.
Yeah, does make a difference, doesn't it? It's the people factor. It's not just he's the expert, it's the people factor and the way in which it's done. Fantastic. Thank you for sharing. Emma?
Hello. My example isn't in the NHS. We see a
That's
private
all right.
paediatrician.
Yeah.
But she's fantastic when we go and see her. My daughter tends not to speak to people. She speaks via me, but she will speak to her, and she actually looks forward to the appointment. And basically the first time we went, it was after a bad experience with, well, a lot of experience with CAMS. And we went there. She was very dubious, very anxious, and we walked in, and straight away the doctor got down to her level and actually spoke to her. And it was the first time any professional had actually spoken directly to her. And then she went on to explain, this is how your brain works, a little bit different to some people, but this is why you feel the way you do. You're not naughty. You're not doing anything wrong. You are expressing how you feel. We just need to teach you new ways to express it. And from that moment, she gained my little girl's trust, because it was the first time she hadn't been the naughty child who couldn't control her behaviour. She had a condition that this doctor had actually legitimised for her. And, you know, it was just fantastic. And that was our turning point, really, for her to be more receptive to other people we go and see. And now I can take her, like we went to A&E beginning of this year, and normally that would have been hell on earth, but she did fantastic. She answered questions when she needed to. She still says to me to answer, but the nurse even at A&E was really good. She directed her questions to my daughter, but accepted my answering it, and there was no batting of the eyelid or anything, and it had an impact sort of longer term.
And you see, but there's all sorts of clues in there. You said that the adult got down to her level. So there's about the communication is physically on the same level, as well as it being a much more equal conversation and child-centered conversation. So in terms of feeding that back in the bigger consciousness, you know, that's the sort of stuff we need to be going back to professionals and saying more like this, please. But in terms of a one-page portrait, you know, and going back and kind of going, this really works. This works for her. But I also think, you know, the bit I'm really smiling at is how many times do we not explain to our children, particularly depending on need, is that actually it's okay to have the things that make them who they are.
Yeah.
And actually, and you know, some of our children have to work harder, they have to try harder, things will be more difficult. It's just how they are. And actually, we don't often spend enough time explaining that and kind of going, do you know, that's just okay. It's just how it is, but it's okay.
She even drew a little graph to show her, because obviously we'd gone and my daughter had said, I feel angry all the time type thing, not quite in that sentence, but that was essentially it. And the doctor drew a graph, and she said, so if I draw a graph, this is me through my day, and I will sometimes, my anxiety will come up here and I'll get angry, and then it comes down. Where would you say you are on that graph? And my daughter said, right up there. And then she said, and where would mum say you are on that graph? And I said, she goes up and then comes down. And she explained it like that. But that visual thing as well just helped.
So again, brilliant top tip, because again, a lot of the things we do with doctors is a lot of verbal, not much show and tell. Some of our children do much better on show and tell. Some of us do much better on show and tell. You know, draw a picture, explain it to me, show me. That's brilliant. Thank you. Fantastic sharing. Vanessa, you had your hand up and you put it down again. Did you want to come on in?
No, because I've realised that that's actually not a good experience. I really did
tell me
bottom of the barrel really badly.
Right, because you didn't have a good experience that you could think of.
I haven't got any now. I'm trying to think really hard and I can't think.
Right, okay. So then what I want you to think about is, given all the bad experiences that you've had, what would you have done differently? So if you could go back, not because you did anything wrong, what would you have asked of others to do differently? What would have turned it from a bad experience into a positive experience? What would you have wanted the professional to do? What could they have managed differently?
I don't know, really. I think I just go through the motions. It's all a bit rubbish, really, isn't it? I think because I try so hard to get some kind of help from health, I just kind of go, all right, I'll turn up, even if I don't want to, or even if I don't need to, because I think, well, I've got to go through the motions. I think for me, it's a lot of it's just going through the motions. I can think of how services helped, but I can't think of an actual appointment where it's ever gone swimmingly.
So one of the things that might help you is if you're turning up and going through the motions, then actually you're going in really with no real expectations that it's going to be half decent.
Well, no, 9 times out of 10, all I expect is to be told no. So as long as I don't get told no, I suppose that's my, yes, that went fantastically.
Okay, so one of the things that might be helpful, because I'm thinking about how to make that back into something that's useful for you, might be to think about what is it you want from that appointment? Because actually, if you're going and you either don't know or you're absolutely certain you're going to get the answer no, you almost kind of potentially set it up to get that before you've even got in the room. Or you're seeing the wrong person at the wrong time for the wrong request. As in, I'm trying to, because actually what you want is for somebody to say, yes, I can do that, or I can't do that, but I could offer you
that
this.
normally happens, to be fair, because I get chucked from pillar to post. It takes me ages to actually end up in this department that I need to be in.
Oh, okay.
Which
So
time I'm
that,
like, oh, I'm fed up with keep telling you the same thing. Do you know what I mean? So I think,
right, and is that because
I
they
don't get
don't?
it.
Is that because they don't know which department? Are you still
Yeah,
going through that
trying to get
space of?
information about health services is an absolute
Okay.
teeth-pulling exercise. There's questions I ask all the time, and I still don't have an answer for it because no one can give me one.
Okay, do you want to try me? I probably won't be able to answer it either, but it's a
Well,
example.
recently it was my son's diagnosis for dyspraxia. Apparently it isn't a diagnosis because he had a sensory assessment and they're saying that they've diagnosed dyspraxia, but then when I've broached it with the school to put that within his needs at school because he gets tired and he causes him pain,
Yeah,
they said they can't accept that as a diagnosis because it's not actually, doesn't actually say this is a diagnosis. But when I spoke to oh, it's a nightmare. When I spoke to occupational therapy, they said he was assessed under the ABC, which is the gold standard of dyspraxia. And basically that is, when I looked up the NICE guidelines, it kind of said the same thing.
yeah.
But then it also said that it has to be signed off by a paediatrician. But if you ask a paediatrician, they say they can't diagnose that. So my son technically has a diagnosis depending on who you ask.
Right, okay. Does your child have an education, health and care plan?
No, he's the one.
Okay.
He has a lot of health. Well, yeah, he has health needs. I cover myself because, quite frankly, I don't know how to navigate this, so I just buy it myself because I just don't. It's like pulling teeth. I can't.
Okay.
So, but then and he has that really high needs, but he's kind of slipped under the net a bit in regards because he gets his needs met at school.
Yeah.
I haven't gone for any HCP, but in the back of my mind, he probably is the one that needs the HCP the most. And I have pushed, I have asked, and I have asked.
Right. Okay.
I've even got occupational therapy and the social worker to talk to each other so that they can explain to us. And it's just I think they know, but it's just a nightmare, isn't it?
It is a nightmare and it can be really difficult. So the system would say, okay, so don't shoot the messenger. The system would say if the needs are being met, then you probably don't need an education, health and care plan.
Yeah, I've
okay,
heard
regardless
that
of a diagnosis.
Yeah, so I've been doing this a long time.
Yeah, but that said, so actually, if you've got a diagnosis from a professional, it should be accepted as valid. Okay,
well, that's what I said.
Right, it should be accepted as valid, and that would be the same anywhere. And there is a professional standard that says, providing you've got the right professional qualification to make that assessment. So occupational therapists should recognise other occupational therapists who have the right professional qualification. So in other words, it's got to be at the right level. But, the answer is, and the paediatrician will accept an occupational therapist's diagnosis. Okay.
Oh, they
Some
do. That's not
places
the problem.
it's school. Is it school
think
saying they
so.
don't
I think
accept
so,
it?
but no, I think it's going to be school. It's definitely school, and I knew they were going to say that before they even said it. I knew they were going to say that, and then and I also think it's going to be social care, and it's like his wheelchair. I had to buy his wheelchair myself because the wheelchair service. Do you know what? To be honest, I didn't even approach the wheelchair service because I knew that if I said I need it because he's got dyspraxia and hypermobility, they'd ask me for a diagnosis and probably turn around and say that that diagnosis wasn't valid because it hasn't actually got, this child has a diagnosis of dyspraxia. It has to be in such layman terms, otherwise.
Okay, so the answer is, I'm really sorry you're in that position because you shouldn't be having to buy stuff for yourself.
I
Because the
know,
system
but
should be doing that.
Well, it should, but you know, it's the easiest option, isn't it? It's messing about. I can't be asked.
Right, but
so much more going
but it
on.
should, right, but it shouldn't. And the other bit though is also, so really the bit that the system hasn't quite wised up to, but they are beginning as a system, this is not just health, is that some of our children are complex in the sense that they have low level overlapping need, but when you look at it as a whole, it's about the whole child. Okay, so it might not necessarily be that the need is outstanding in one area. Some children, it's a really dominant need in one particular area, a particular diagnosis, a particular type of need that dominates everything else. For other children, it's more complex. It's lower levels of need that when you put them all together make quite a complex level of need for a child. Okay, so dyspraxia does overlap with joints that don't work conventionally, either they're too tight or they're too loose. Okay, there is a correlate that has an impact on all mobility, but also interestingly physiotherapists will say to you things like children who don't have good core strength will sit and slouch, children who have sensory issues will sit and slouch and then can't feel where they are, so they'll fidget because they can't feel where they are, but they'll also fidget because they slouch because they're not comfortable, because the inner core's not strong, and then you get this odd behavior, and then that manifests as they can't concentrate because actually they're spending all their time fidgeting because they're not comfortable and they're not supported and it doesn't work, and then we wonder why they can't learn, because actually it isn't the learning that's necessarily the issue, it's the physical needs that interrupt the ability or make the ability to access the learning that much harder. A
lot of his problem is that his physical issues impact on his education. He's way above average. He's working at at year 3, he's only in year 2, so that's not an issue for him. It is he gets tired, his joints hurt, and the added sensory processing that he has, which is quite severe. He has to wear, we run taps and he covers his ears. It's that sensitive.
Okay, so
as an issue on him as well. So, but I'm not getting. He doesn't get any help about any of that whatsoever.
But that's a mixture of health and education. Okay, I'm going to say something a bit controversial. Children who have these overlapping levels of need, it's about cumulative impact, and really you probably should be saying that he probably needs an assessment for how those things impact on his ability to learn, because actually they are important in learning, because if you're dealing with all of those other issues and it's impacting on your ability to learn, and actually it's not about children being behind, it's sometimes about the level of effort the child needs to make in order to be where they are. And actually some of children who are making fantastic academic progress, if you look at all of those other needs, and the question is how much of that can be met by reasonable normal adjustment within a classroom setting, and some of it can be, but school need to recognise that and then adjust round. But equally sometimes it's then about saying actually this isn't about just one area, this is about a cumulative need that needs addressed, and some of that needs to be done through a health assessment, some of it might need to be done through an education, health and care assessment as a bigger package.
Yeah, I just don't know where to start with it all.
Happy to pick that up offline then, because you're right to be asking, and you should be asking, and some of our children are overlapping and complex. It's not just one area.
To be fair, it's all been a bit mediocre. It's not like I've sat there and people have been really offensive and horrible and nasty and rude, because I can't sit here and say they have. But at the same time, I get that kind of, they speak to me and not to my 17-year-old. And I don't know whether that's because she's got a learning disability or what, I don't know, or just because she's got disability full stop. I do find that they don't, so it's good that people are kind of speaking. And I will
Good,
sit there
okay.
and say, I will sit there and say, you know, why are you asking me? She's sitting there, you could ask her, not me. I like to remind them that actually.
Well, and actually that might be the first conversation you have when you step into the room, or when you book the appointment. You say, today, if you remember, I'm here just to accompany and listen.
Well, I've jotted down, because it's something I keep meaning to do. So I've jotted down on my little list that I need to do, like these little passporty things for both the eldest and the youngest.
Yeah. And see how that works. And you might need to tweak it and adjust it, but it might be the top one for your daughter says, you know, please do the appointment where she is in the lead. You know,
No,
that
she'll
might be the
love that.
first sentence. And when you go in, you just say, just remember it's my daughter's appointment today. I'm just here
He doesn't
to
like
be
shaking
in
the
the
doctor's
background.
hand either, so he'll put his hand out and she'll grab the tip of his finger and go like that.
Or even teach her to say, hello, I don't do hands, don't shake hands, you know, and actually equip her to manage, because actually it's our staff, we've got so used to doing that as a social interaction. Then COVID came and then everybody kind of went, oh, can't do that. But you know, if there are social interactions which are difficult, equip the doctor or the medical or the person you're seeing to remember that that's not, but equip your child equally to say, your young person to say, nice to meet you, forgive me, I don't shake hands. You know, give her the words to manage that, so that, because that's a social situation she's going to be in lots of times. So give her the tools to do that, so that actually she starts off in a good footing, and maybe the tools, if she's able to do it and you're able to help her, that says, you know, mum's just coming to sit in and listen.
Yeah, that's a lot of what we do, actually, to be fair. I do say,
so
look,
you've got this already.
I know, but I think because myself and my children are so far removed, and we really are so far removed from any health services whatsoever, I gave up trying a long time ago, and I think I've got myself in that rut now, where I just turn up and go, Morrigan, take it away, or I sit there and go, here's a list of what I've thought of for the last, you know, couple of months.
So try and go into the next one with a fresh start, particularly if you're seeing somebody new, because otherwise they'll pick that up, they'll pick those vibes up, and they might be equally confused as to what they can and can't offer you. And they might not be reading that as somebody who actually wants help. They might be reading that as, I'm really not sure what this person wants from this appointment. Even if you go in and say, you know, I suspect you might not be able to help me, but I'm hoping you can do. I kind of think you have to tear up to give them the chance to help you, and the chance to answer your questions, and the chance to be positive, because each time that's somebody, that could be somebody new. If it's the same person you've seen 5 times and you're not getting anywhere, you might have to call it quits. But actually try and tear up so that you go in saying, you know, if you did nothing else today, but you helped me with this, that would be really positive. And so I'm hoping you'll be able to tell me where we go next, or you'll be able to see if this is possible, and try and make it easy for them to say, actually, I can help you with that. Or actually, that's not me, but I can refer you on. Yeah?
Yeah, I'll give it a go.
Okay, fabulous. Okay. Si.
Sorry, I'm all distracted now. It's not a health one, it was a EHCP, and then the irony of someone's just left to go for an EHCP thing, and I think it's really sad that we all say good luck because we all expect it to be crap.
Yeah,
it's just how it is, isn't it? But it wasn't the last one. She would be in year 8 if she was at mainstream, but it was a year 6 transition EHCP review.
Yeah.
What went well with that was I was the Ascend governor as well.
Okay.
And when they booked it, and I said, that's fine, but I'm taking the lead on it. And we switched it completely. So Mia came in, she stayed for half of it, and she was very involved, but they weren't going to get an educational psychologist. She'd not seen one since she was 3. I blackmailed them into getting that. So I'd forced them to have everything that she needed to set her up for the best possible outcome for the paperwork. And it was just nice knowing that the previous year, because they'd had a really sucky Ofsted review, her girls were all maths based because that's where the school needed to focus. So they'd guided every EHCP was heavily, well, she didn't have anything but maths focused girls.
Gosh, okay.
So this one was actually proper and reflected Mia and her needs, and the educational psychologist, she was brilliant. They got a private company in and she'd done it into a big spider graph type thing so that Mia could access it. And while we was in that, like, it had been fed back to Mia briefly, but we'd gone more into it with Mia because she has some understanding. And it was nice to see her included because even her views on it has been the same for years. That there's nothing, it was kind of like there was nothing academic that they'd asked her what her goals were, because she didn't matter, because they're not expected anything for her, because she's an SEN kid and she's just going to go on benefits when she leaves school. And that's kind of the assumption that's made when, what are your goals? And it's like, oh, where do you want to live when you're older? Is it with mum and dad? And it's like, were you asking her or are you giving her the answer? So, yeah. And I've just, like, Vanessa would show me them Jamboard things, which I love. So we've just done one because I've got a review on Monday for our next one. But done it very in depth, like what Mia's goals are and broken them down. And she was learning stuff about what she wants from her future and things. So that was a point, and then I've actually looked at the draft that's been sent out. So it was positive that, yeah, it was what we wanted rather than what was their agenda. It was focused for Mia. So yeah, I'm keen to get that again because I'm aware she's in year 8, and if she was mainstream, she should have options and things like that, and nothing's been discussed.
And that's really important, and that's why, you know, this expertise, it's all transferable, isn't it? You know, and actually you've got this. It should be person-centered. You know, the child or young person that we've been talking about today should be at the center of it. And as they get old enough to actually be able to articulate more of what they want, we should be hearing that voice. We should be listening to that voice. We should be growing their options. We should be giving them more opportunities. We should be making them ambitious and excited about their futures. You know, and the professionals working with them should be focusing on that. That's really, really important. And
one of her goals is she wants to make a soup made of fur, which is like absolutely mad as a box of frogs. But did it ever reflect Mia and say that on her EHCP? No, because nobody ever bothered their ass asking her.
Why does she want to do that?
Because she's in not fairies in flappy wings, fairies as in people who dress as animals on TikTok, and this is her aspiration in life, is to be a part-time author and a part-time YouTuber dressed in a fairy costume.
Right, so you've just translated her statement into something that the other professionals would understand. That's a really, really important part of you being the expert. You've expertly done the translation that says, when she says this, what she's actually telling you is, and that's the bit that needs to go in the education, health and care plan. That's the bit that when you're talking with the other professionals, you need to say, well, she said this, but actually, if you look at it through her life and her lens of how she's seeing the world, that's what it means. And that's an important skill. And the answer is, and you need to probably give them the wording that you want in that education, health and care plan that says, Mia told you, but actually you didn't include it because I think you thought it was a bit out there and you didn't understand it. What she actually wants is to have the ability and skill to do this sort of thing, because that's actually important to her.
Wants to, like she says, I want to do cartoons, but she wants to do start stop animation and things like that. So is that something they can put in practice in school? Because she's at a specialist setting where they're not kind of structured like mainstream. Instead of making cinnamon buns weekly, which don't really benefit her because she don't like bloody cinnamon. And none of us do. They go in the bin.
But that's the sort of thing where, you know, you've just embodied the whole reason of doing today's session. And we've done it through the vehicle of health, but you could do it through any vehicle. The answer is, you know your child really, really well. And you also can do all that translation, and you can stand in their shoes, but also then translate that back to the professionals, and also model to the professionals what good looks like. You know, this is what I expect you to do when you're working with my child, my young person. I want you to do that. And what you need to teach them is when she says this, what you need to do is get underneath what is Mia actually telling you in terms that you can then translate and use in your curriculum. You know, stop start animation, brilliant. You've taken it from cartoons to stop. I thought you might take it to actually she really likes graphic design. You know, she really loves that sort of style of drawing, and you know, but you've translated it into something they can work with. And that's the bit as a parent, don't ever underestimate. You do that, you do it instinctively, you do it intuitively. And so you've just articulated what probably lots of other people on this call do, but you need to help the professionals that don't instinctively do it to do it. Because some professionals will do it, some will get down to a child's level, some will talk directly to the child, they'll do spidergrams, they'll do drawings, they just work like that. You don't have to teach them, they instinctively do the world that way, but some don't. And what we've got to do is help those who don't instinctively do it, but don't necessarily mean harm. We've got to help them understand how they get the best for our child, or our young person.
I think she needs that professional as well, because it is a specialist setting and they are brilliant with her and she's come on so much, but like, all right, mate, and she needs that person to guide her, not to be her friend. And she's the laziest learner you'll ever come across. So sometimes she needs a bit of a kick in to get her in the right direction.
But that's the sort of thing, isn't it? Yeah. And actually, you could have been at my parents' evening, because I said the same to my child's school. I said, he'll do as little as possible. He doesn't do it to, you know, because he's lazy. He will do what he needs to do. But actually, you'll know if you've pushed him too far. You can tell by the eyes, because you'll know.
If she can get you to do her work or another class member, she will do.
Important life skill, fantastic life skill, actually. You think about it. A lot of people go a long way in life being able to do that, but it's just translation, isn't it? Ladies, we're coming towards the end of the session. Did anybody else want to come in who's not come in? Because if not, then I'm going to draw us to a close. I'm hoping what you've got on that bit of paper, and then listening to those people who are kind enough to share their examples, is what I'm hoping is you're thinking about the things that work well, you're reflecting on the things that are difficult. Don't go away from today disheartened about the difficult stuff. You will deal with difficult stuff. We all do. It doesn't matter how expert you are in navigating the system. Sometimes the system is just difficult. And sometimes actually we all give in to the path of least resistance because it's easier and it's more comfortable. And sometimes it's just expedient. You see, look, I'm using all those clever long words again. Sometimes it's just quicker, less painful. And actually you just get to the point of saying, I can't be bothered. You know, that's perfectly okay, because sometimes actually that's what I need on a bad day. I need it to be easy because I'm just a bit worn down and a bit too tired, and I've just got to the point where actually I just don't think I can face it. We all have days like that, but think about the things that do work. Think about the good experience you've had. Try and model to those that you're working with what you need and expect of them, because quite often they'll up their game or they'll vary what they do because it works. But do think about those tips and techniques. How to ace an appointment. It's a free resource. It's quite a complicated resource. You might find it useful, you might not. You won't see it on the screen because it's a bit tiny, but I've given you the link. It's from Council for Disabled Children. It's a different version of a one-page passport. It may be useful, but there's lots of different examples out there. Make every conversation count. You know, we've talked a lot about this today. And actually, I think it comes back to Vanessa's point. Think about actually what you want from your appointment, and try and set that out almost as you book the appointment, and try and be clear about, you know, if I get one thing back, the one thing I would really like is, and try and be upfront about that, because actually that makes it really easy for a professional to know if they're doing okay. Most professionals, because we're human beings, in whatever role we've got, most of us like to feel that we've done the thing that was expected of us. Most of us are intensely people pleasers, whether we intend to be or not. So make it easy for people to know. The obvious thing is about being polite and calm and respectful and confident, but don't be a pushover. Do say what you need to say. Try and preface it with the nice stuff, but be clear if something doesn't cut the mustard. And be really good at giving compliments when they're duly earned, but equally being clear when things are not acceptable. Okay, but actually most people respond brilliantly when you praise them. That's us done. That's us finished. But at the back of the slide pack, I think I included it on here. Oh yeah, so last couple of things then. You've got this. That may sound patronizing, it's not meant to be, you know, it's a genuine thing. You actually have all the skills you need, and you might go away from today kind of go, well, I knew all that. Good, you know it all. I'm hoping there are some things though today that are things that you think, I didn't quite know that bit, or actually that's quite helpful, or actually next time I go and do this, I'm going to look at it just slightly differently. Do encourage others with your newfound knowledge or your confidence in your skills. Do go back and think, are there things next time that I might try differently, might add in the mix that would be kind of useful? But do go knowing your confidence. I would love to know how the lady who was going off to go and do a review today got on. If you'd like to encourage her to let me know. I'm hoping that, having all wished her good luck, that we didn't need to wish her good luck, because actually it went swimmingly. And I'm hoping that on the back of this, she went kind of going, I've got this and I'm the expert. And she's walked in and used all the clever language and spoken like an expert and looked everybody in the eye, and not taken no for an answer. Okay. It's tough being a parent of a SEND child, but there are lots of positives. And I think the real challenge for all of us is remembering, actually, you've got so much expertise to offer. You've got so much knowledge. You're not going to know everything. It's always a bit of a roller coaster, and it's always a bit of a journey. But actually, you know a lot. Just make the stuff work for you. Flex it, make the language work, make the body language work. Go in there, hold your own, don't take no for an answer, and be clear about what you'd like, because 9 times out of 10, the clearer you are, the more likely somebody is able to do it. And at the back of your pack, did I leave it as the last slide? I've provided a slide for you that you can print out. So for those of you who like a good certificate, you can have a certificate that's on behalf of Whole Parent Carer Forum, delivered by Pinpoint, and it's the Council for Disabled Children's Training, to say